Now recognize the gentleman from New Mexico, Mr. Pearce.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Chair White. Appreciate your straightforward and honest answers here. As I look at the appropriation bills coming out, Milcon VA, that funds buildings and things that the quality of life for our soldiers, and they're getting a 33% cut according to the President's budget. You all are requesting a 30% increase to $1.9 billion. You think that's justified in the budget that we're facing, seeing that our soldiers are probably going to have less facilities and less pay?
Well, I, of course, would advocate fully resourcing and taking care of our soldiers without any question about that. I do think our budget request is fully justified. Obviously, I have written the justification for it. I've described earlier, I think, our extensive and really growing and new responsibilities to carry out what Congress has mandated we carry out to the markets, investors, and capital formation. I think we need, and we've been surgical about that request. We are deficit neutral, which means...
I appreciate that, and we could get into a very good discussion about if our soldiers were allowed to charge the customers they protect, they could be budget neutral. We could also say that if the administration weren't shutting down mines, the increase in oil production on federal lands was only 6%, private land 61% in the last year. So we could have a very interesting discussion there, but that's not really where I want to go. During the time that we saw Bear Stearns, Lehman Brothers collapse, Bernie Madoff, Alan Stanford, and MF Global, the chart shows that the SEC budget actually almost went up by 5 times. And so during a period of tremendous budget growth, we were finding that SEC was doing very little more in the first place. J.P. Morgan was just assessed $1.7 or $8 billion fine for not reporting Madoff. Was that justified?
Again, that's a Department of Justice case. I'm actually recused on J.P. Morgan cases, so I don't think I can appropriately comment on that.
Well, I would like to make a comment that so J.P. Morgan was fined a lot, and yet Harry Markopolos brought in to you all, SEC, in 2000, 2001, 2005. He just reports it. And it wasn't like, and so we're talking budget, we're talking priorities, the same thing Mr. Capuano talked about. We're talking about the priorities. He said it took him literally minutes. They were trying to figure out how to pull away a customer, and he pulls up the prospectus for Madoff and says, in minutes. So it doesn't require another $1 billion worth of budget for more lawyers. In minutes, he said, I realized it couldn't be true. He said it actually took me 4 hours to realize they would have had to sell more trades than existed that whole year. And yet no one in the SEC during a time that they're increasing their budget by triple and quadruple and more, no one took the 4 minutes to say, this can't be true. And in fact, it took multiple efforts to report Madoff, and still they would just whisk it away. The same thing was going on with Mr. Stanford, and one guy that used to work for the SEC was out stalling off the entire agency, a guy named Schobloom. He was out there advising, and he was able to stall you off for 20 years. And so how is a budget going to improve your performance when you have people like Mr. Barash, who says anytime the lower levels were pushing the investigation up on Stanford, saying, no, we're not going to let that go? How is it going to improve your performance to go 20 times your budget if you have a culture inside that turns and looks the other way?
I don't think we have that culture inside at all.
Well, then let me interrupt, because you had people sitting in the room with Mr. Corzine, as he allegedly, according to Ms. O'Brien, says. Ms. O'Brien says that he gave the order for me to transfer $200 million. You had people sitting in the room. According to Mr. Robert Cook, his testimony in front of Congress says, yes, we were sitting in the room. We became alarmed at MF Global. We were sitting in the room, and yet those things were allowed to occur. So you say that the culture doesn't exist, but it was able to go on for 20 years with Mr. Stanford. It was able to go on with Mr. Madoff for even longer. Why do you say that no culture exists?
I don't think there's that culture, but I certainly would not dispute that those raise serious issues, challenges, and the SEC, before my time, but hopefully as I continue, has addressed those issues. I mean, one of the things
If
in
I
our
could
budget.
take the last second or two,
Yeah.
you've already heard, too, Mr. Cleaver, and you heard Mr. Lynch say nobody goes to jail. Nobody in the agency is ever responsible. We haven't fired anybody. We haven't terminated anybody for their failures in these cases. These $65 billion on Madoff in years, and no one in the agency is ever responsible. I mean, you're hearing back and forth. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You've been very gracious.